Hello, everybody. It's Carolyn Van Dyken and Susan Clinton at the Genius PT Project, and we are on our third project talking about the patient experience. We have the extreme honor of having Joletta Belton with us today, and Joletta comes from Colorado, and Joletta and I have met, I don't know, 5 or 6 years in a row at the San Diego Pain Summit. Unfortunately, this past year was the first year that I missed, but Joletta was still there. And Joletta really has some amazing stories to share from a patient perspective, looking at persistent pain in the patient experience. So first of all, thank you, Joletta, for coming and spending some time with us. We're actually going to spend a couple of sessions with Joletta because she has so much to share with us. And so this first session is really going to be about her story. And so welcome, Joletta. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about who you are and start with your story?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on too. I really appreciate the opportunity to share the patient perspective. My pain story started way back in January of 2010 when I was working as a firefighter paramedic for Orange County Fire Authority in California. I was living in California at the time. I just stepped off the fire engine and felt a twinge in my hip, and that twinge led me onto a path of ongoing worsening pain, and this unexpected journey to land me in front of you here today. Part of that journey was also going back to school and studying pain kind of academically. And as I was studying pain and had been through this lived experience of pain that I'll get into, I started making sense of my experiences through a blog that I started writing called mycupofjoe.com. And it was really just a place for me to put together what I was learning with what I was living to make sense of what I was going through. And through that, I stumbled upon the work of Lorimer Mosley, and he was the one that introduced me to the Pain Summit in San Diego, which I am now a lifer for, and I will be going every year. So hopefully I'll see you again in February.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And in addition to the My Cup of Joe work that I do, I also founded a nonprofit, just born out of my experiences with pain and a new understanding of pain that I came to, called the Endless Possibilities Initiative. And that's peer-to-peer education, support, and resources for people living with pain. And we also provide some clinician education things too. And a new thing that I'm doing now too that just recently began is kind of partnering with retrainpain.org, the Retrain Pain Foundation, and providing the patient perspective in their clinician training programs with Alon Schneider. So really excited about that too, and really stoked that he wants to bring in that patient perspective to clinician training.
Right.
So I have such hope, and coming onto things like this, have such hope that patient perspective is really being integrated more into training and education and understanding of what pain is, and then developing better paths forward for everybody, for patients, for people living with pain, for the people for clinicians who are treating the people living with pain, and the people who support all of those groups. So really, really cool stuff.
That's really cool. I think one of the things that we need to remember as clinicians always is that the patient is the expert, right? The patient is the expert on their pain, and really taking the time to listen to their story and giving voice to their story is probably one of the most powerful things that we can do at the beginning of our therapeutic relationship. Would you agree with that, or can you expand on that a little bit?
I would. I think so often when we're living with pain for a long time, our stories are the thing that gets most lost in those interactions, and we just become kind of our medical folder that gets passed from clinician to clinician, and we become our symptoms, we become our condition, we become the pain, and we stop being a person. We stop being a person that has a story to tell and a story to live. We become the story of a hip or a painful back or a diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis or CRPS. We become those things, and we stop being the people that we were before this pain or this condition set in. So I think it's so incredibly important to hear patient stories, to understand who they are as people, because that's going to inform the clinician in so many ways, not just about that person's pain or what symptoms they might be having, but who they are as a person, which can then inform the path forward. Because what's meaningful and valuable to them is really what's going to drive them to get better, to heal, to be able to recover, and being able to re-engage with those things was so valuable for me. But I could only get there once I felt like I was validated, that I felt like my pain was believed and real. And once I felt heard, once I felt that I wasn't being dismissed anymore. For a long time in my experience, I just kind of felt like my concerns were never addressed. That the things that mattered to me weren't addressed, and that the things that were clinically important were prioritized.
Right. So it's not the right hip in room 4. It's Joletta Belton in room 4.
Right.
And it's listening to Joletta's story and what's important to her and what she needs to get out of this therapeutic relationship, really.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things too, like I said at the beginning, my pain started with this misstep off a fire engine. So I was working as a firefighter paramedic when I got hurt, and I was strong. I was fit. I was incredibly active. Like my off days when I wasn't working hard or playing hard, I would go for long runs. Like that was an off day for me. So I was this very active, physically fit person before this pain set in. And then throughout that process of going to treatment and the pain not getting better and the pain actually getting worse and not really having a good explanation for that was really confusing, because it didn't align with who I was. In all of my previous experiences with pain, I'd had a lot of injuries being a firefighter, being a competitive athlete growing up. I'd had a lot of injuries. I'd had 3 surgeries under anesthesia because of injuries. So I'd had some pretty serious injuries before, and I'd never had pain problems before. So this was a really disorienting experience, and it dragged on for a really long time.
How long was that? How long did it go on for?
So when the twinge first happened, I wouldn't even call it pain. It was just a twinge. And I started doing physical therapy a couple weeks after that had happened. I went to our occupational doctor because it hadn't gotten better, and he prescribed some muscle relaxants and PT. My PT was interesting because I just did what I called triathlons, where I rode the bike, ran on the treadmill, and did the stair mill for like 15 minutes apiece. Those were my sessions. And I got worse. And then the doc sent me to a different PT where the focus again was like strength and core stability and all this stuff that I didn't have issue with, but I didn't think about it at all at the time, because it was all the stuff that I liked to do and I wanted to continue to do. And I was still working full time, my 24, 48, sometimes 72-hour shifts, and doing this when I was going to physical therapy on my days off. It was 5 months after that initial twinge that I actually went off work. And it was because the pain kept getting worse and I was starting to lose function as well. It was a day at work where I realized how much I was struggling just getting onto the fire engine, especially if I had turnouts on or protective gear on. I just couldn't raise my leg up enough to even get into the cab of the engine. And I realized I was becoming a hazard to my crew, to the public, to myself. And so I went off work at that time on workers' compensation. And then things just kind of spiraled because I didn't see a care provider for almost 4 months. And it was just a very adversarial system where you feel like your moral integrity is being investigated before your pain is even being addressed. So during that 4 months, I wasn't talking to anybody. So I wasn't even getting bad information. I wasn't getting any information at all. And I wasn't getting any reassurance or anything either. And so it was about 10 months into the experience, I was finally referred to an ortho. I got injections, but the injections made things worse. And I was referred to another ortho, and he recommended surgery. And it was another 3 months that I had surgery. So then now we're at 13 months after the twinge. And then the pain didn't get better after the surgery either. I had such high hopes. I was diagnosed with femoral acetabular impingement, FAI. And had a femoroplasty and chondroplasty and all that. And I was convinced that this was going to be the thing that fixed me and got me back to work. But it didn't fix me. I still had pain after the surgery. Although the worst of the pain was resolved. I used to have this very deep visceral pain that was nauseating and felt like there was little gremlins inside me squeezing all of my organs, or like little knives being stabbed into my organs. That deep visceral pain was relieved after the surgery, but I still had groin pain and SI joint pain and some other pain. So that was 13 months in, and then 2 years after that was when I medically retired from the fire department. So over the course of those 3 total years were what I call my dark years, kind of the worst years of my pain. And what was really interesting, and something that was never noted in my course of care either, because I saw so many different people, and there was never one person other than the work comp adjuster who was coordinating my care. When I had surgery, so after months and months and months of some of that time kind of being alone with my worst thoughts, and when I went off work, those thoughts included my job is on the line, my financial security is on the line, my retirement is on the line. If I'm not making the money that I was used to making, are we going to be able to stay in our house? Like, there was so much stress associated with all that too. And then I wasn't working out. I lost a ton of weight. So from the time I went off work in June of 2010 to the time of my surgery in March of 2011, I'd lost almost 30 pounds.
Wow.
And I didn't have that. I weighed what I weighed in 4th grade. I didn't have it to lose. So at that time, then I became a totally different person. This was the point I've been trying to get to all along. So then now I'm going to new therapists, and they're seeing this individual who's been in pain for over a year, who is 110 pounds and small and frail. And that's not who I was. That's not who Joletta was used to being. I was used to being this firefighter who was strong and fit and a badass, kind of like a self-proclaimed hero of my community. Yeah. And who my biggest pride was being called one of the guys, that I held my own as a firefighter. In a department of 1,000 firefighters, there was only 22 females, and I held my own. And then all of a sudden I was this different person. And that's the person that was coming before all of these clinicians. That's the person that they saw. And they saw that painful hip in room 4 and not me. And that's why I think it's so, so important for those stories to be told and to be heard, so that people know who we are, because we're not our pain. And usually when we're in pain, especially for a long time, we don't like what that pain has made us become. We don't like the people we are when we can't engage with our friends, when we can't do the things that are meaningful to us, when we can't relate to people in the same ways that we did before, when we can't work, when we can't do all of those social roles that made us feel like ourselves, when we can't do all of those activities that make us feel like us. That's just not us.
There's a significant cost to pain that is really unspoken and unseen, isn't there? And I think that's what you're really talking about here. And so how did that change for you? Where did that journey start to change from one of hopelessness and sort of being kind of in the darkest spot in your life to now helping other people to make sense of their stories of pain?
Yeah, so I medically retired from my job as a firefighter 3 years to the day of that twinge. So after my surgery, and after it was determined that I couldn't go back to work as a firefighter, I worked in a civilian position for a while in our wellness and fitness department. I don't remember the 2 years I worked in that role. Like, when I look back at that time, it's just this like black fog. Drew Letter calls it a malignant mist. And to me, that just encapsulates it so well, because I don't remember much from that time. But when I left work, I was also trying to get out of the workers' compensation system at the advice of my surgeon, who was a wonderful human being and a wonderful clinician, and never once made me feel like my pain was all in my head or my fault. Never once made me feel bad for the surgery not working. He was a huge advocate for me, but just everything that he recommended to work comp was denied. So, and his hands were tied. And so for him, he was like, you need to get out of the workers' compensation system. You need to really just find your own path, because you're not going to get better within this system. So I decided I was going to find that path, and I went back to graduate school. So I went back to graduate school and studied human movement, because I still had very biomechanical notions of pain. And I thought that I had to be moving wrong or sitting wrong. My posture had to be wrong, or my core stability was off. Like, all of these things that I had kind of been told over the years, and that I believed. I was a peer fitness trainer for the fire department. So I told people all of this stuff for a long time too, for many years in my role as a fitness trainer. So these beliefs were ingrained in me So I went back to graduate school in human movement, but I chose pain science as my research focus. And that changed everything for me. It was very challenging.
Can I ask you how you found pain science as your research interest? Like in your biomechanical kin course, really, master's, how did you find pain science? How did that happen?
Well, and it was really just because I didn't know what I was going to find, number one. I don't know if I would have chose it if I knew what it was.
Right, right.
But I really just wanted to figure out my pain. So I thought if I studied movement and I studied pain,
right,
then I would be able to figure this out. But it was interesting because even within my program, what I was learning in some of my classes were at odds with what I was studying in the pain science literature. Because we were allowed to pick a research focus that we carried through all of our classes. So it would be a topic that we wrote about throughout like the classes that we took. So I didn't have any instructors who were really strong in pain science either. They were learning it from what I was writing and sharing with them. And it was at odds with some of the stuff that we were learning. So there was cognitive dissonance at that level. And then also just my own beliefs going in.
Right.
As I started learning all this stuff, though, it did make sense. Like, especially when I would reflect on how much stress I was under when I went off work, financial stress. Because I was making like a third of what I had been making when I was working full time, which when you were talking about all of the losses, it was actually at the San Diego Pain Summit once when I met Jason Silvernail. It might've been the second year. So I'd already known him a little bit, but he talked about all of that. He framed it as primary losses and that we never talk about the primary losses, but in healthcare, we tend to focus on the secondary gains.
Right.
And those gains are often so much less than what those losses were. But so reflecting on how some of that could have affected my pain experience, all of that made sense. But even learning all of that, I was like, yeah, this totally makes sense. This is great. But my pain is real.
Right.
My pain is very much in my hip. That is exactly where I feel it and have always felt it, and it has never moved.
Yeah.
There's got to be something wrong in there.
Yeah.
Before my surgery, it was FAI. After my surgery, I had somehow messed up my surgery.
Right.
Those were my beliefs.
So even confronted with new information and information that made total sense to you, the belief system that you had was still very strong.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind is not only the journey, which is incredible, but the psychosocial piece of this and how strong that is, and how even with presented with new information or information that can change people's perspective, it takes time for that perspective to really begin to change.
Yeah, that shift takes time. I've written about it a couple of times, and I frame it as it takes time for those cognitive shifts to become behavioral shifts, to become biological shifts.
Right.
Like it doesn't happen overnight, and those seeds kind of have to be planted and nourished. And that's hard when people are getting conflicting information from people. So you could get this new information from one person or one place, but then you're still hearing that narrative that no, pain is damage, or pain is your posture, pain is your lack of core stability, or whatever it might be. When you're still hearing all that, that makes that transition, that shift, even more difficult.
So really looking carefully at your team and who you put around you in this journey is so important if that shift is going to happen.
Yeah, very much so.
And so for you, how did that shift start? You talked a little bit about Lorimer Moseley. Can you tell us a little bit about that encounter? Yeah.
He was gracious enough to reply to an email that I sent him when I was in graduate school that shared with him my life story. And we had to interview someone for a project in school that was in our field. Well, I no longer had a field, so I just figured pain was my field. That was all. Right. That was what I was living at the time. So I'm like, Lorimer Moseley, he's in the pain field. And I didn't really expect him to say yes, but he did. So I interviewed him. We did a Skype interview, and I talked to him for like 45 minutes, and I grilled him during that entire time on pain science.
Right.
So still very much of the belief that I could find one thing that was the answer. That if I just hit upon that one nugget, that it would change everything. And at the end of that 45 minutes of me grilling him on pain science, I asked him what the one thing he would want people with chronic pain to know or to do. And at first he's like, first I got to give you like a sciencey answer. So he did. He's like, but my real answer is to love and be loved. Mm-hmm. And that floored me. It absolutely floored me. And he would never take credit for being the thing that shifted my perspective or that changed my trajectory, but he truly was, because that statement from this preeminent neuroscientist who studies pain and understands pain, for him to say to love and be loved, it gave me the permission to look at things a little bit differently. And it also made me realize how, at that time I'd been in pain for 4.5 years, how unloved and unloving I felt, and how unworthy and devalued I felt just as a human being. The whole process of healthcare at times was very dehumanizing. And you just lose your sense of self and your sense of self-worth and your sense of purpose and value and place in the world. And when you lose all of that, just hearing that you are worthy of love, that you are capable of loving, was ground shifting for me. And it was moving forward from that, not overnight like I'm making it sound, but moving forward from that I thought maybe I could make space for my pain. Maybe I could just make some room for it and start re-engaging with the things that matter to me, the things that I love. Maybe I could start focusing on things like love and gratitude and engaging in meaningful activities, reestablishing relationships. When I was in pain for all that time, I had totally disconnected from everybody, from my family, from my friends. I didn't take calls. I didn't respond to texts. I became very isolated and withdrawn into this shell of my former self. And my worst pain was with sitting. So I couldn't sit. So I didn't drive. So I didn't go anywhere. So my world was this, small, dark, pained place in my house that I never left and never engaged anymore. And after that, after learning about pain science at that point for over a year, and then interviewing Laura Mosley and understanding maybe my path forward a little bit differently, that maybe I can make space for pain and engage with life again, I just started trying to do that. Like just with small things like going outside and paying attention to outside. I started taking pictures just with my phone, pictures of nature, like snails and flowers in my backyard. And it helped me to see the world through a different lens, like literally through a different lens, and really helped me to see the world again for like the first time. And to realize that I was still a part of that world and that it was still there and still beautiful and wondrous and fascinating and all of these things, despite my absence from it for so long. And just bit by bit started getting outside more, reconnecting with family, reconnecting with things that matter to me, doing things that helped calm my systems down. Greg Lehman's work was helpful for me during that time too, and his whole framework of calming shit down.
Right.
So I would
be building it up.
engage in meaningful activities and calm shit down. That was my path kind of forward.
Yeah. And how did you so very much it's, sorry, go ahead. Can you hear me?
I don't know if I did something.
Okay. Susan, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I
can hear you, Joletta.
Huh.
Okay. Let's just give it a sec. Oh, there you are.
No, I can't hear anything.
No? Okay, we can hear you.
I don't know what happened.
We can hear you. Okay. Try, of course you can't hear me, so.
Let me do this.
Okay.
Did you get that? Leave.
Yeah, she did.
Okay, good.
She did.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes there's just a
never know with the
disconnect.
internet and stuff. So Cole, we're on a bit of a pause, and you can just take this part of the video out and then reconnect us back when we come back in. So while we're waiting for her to come, oh, there she is.
Oh, there she is. All right.
Yeah.
Woo, we're back.
I had turned my volume way up.
Oh, oh, that was alarming. Okay, we're good. So we can cut that piece out. That's not a problem.
Yeah,
So we'll just start from here again.
That out. It's all good.
Okay, so I was just going to ask or make a comment that it's interesting that if we look at the biopsychosocial model, what you appear to have done is to actually start with the social component, which I would say is probably not a place that most therapists would think to start. We get stuck in the bio piece. We're really uncomfortable talking about the psychological piece and stress and the neuro piece around stress. And social, we just don't even think about going there. So I think it's really fascinating that you started to re-engage in life and re-engage with, people in your life to love and be loved.
Yeah.
And that started to turn the corner for you.
And I love the little things that you did, the emphasis that you had on the little things, like just looking at nature and taking pictures of it with your phone, things that people have at their disposal that just helped you do something different. And it had brought meaning, and it doesn't have to be big, gigantic, crazy changes is what I'm hearing from you. It just needs to be something with some intention on it. And I love that part of the story quite a bit.
Well, and the nature photography was good for me in retrospect in so many ways, because it helped me to shift my attention too. Like when you're in pain for that long, and my pain was bad for a lot of years. It was all I thought about. It took up all my attention, all my resources, all my capacity. I mean, it was the center of my universe. It was everything for so long. And so much of that was because it didn't make sense. And I didn't have a good explanation for it. I didn't have a good story around it. I didn't have a story around it that made sense to me. I didn't know why I still had pain. And nobody seemed to be able to tell me. And it was going back to school and learning about the science of pain, learning that it's multi-system and multifactorial. There's all of these things that contribute to our pain experiences. Was really eye-opening in so many ways. And then being able to start engaging with the world again, especially through nature photography, which got me moving. It got me putting my body in different positions without overthinking it, because I was definitely like a hyper-vigilant mover. When I was doing my exercises or anything like that like my homework from PT, I was so just anal about my form and so vigilant about posture and movement mechanics. I would be thinking when I was just going for a walk what my pelvic rhythm was doing, like my lumbopelvic rhythm, things that people should not be thinking about when going for a walk.
Yeah. Did that serve you well? Did that serve you well? No. Like sitting, I would be focused on my like sitting upright, rolling my hips forward, bringing my shoulders back. I had all of these rules, all of these movement rules and habits that I had fallen into. But when I was taking pictures, I wasn't thinking about any of that kind of stuff. There was actually one time, kind of years into this, and I had stopped doing any kind of formal exercising. So I just realized that stuff wasn't good for me at that time, because I was so focused on things that probably didn't matter, when I should just be moving and playing, as Todd Hargrove would say. Right. And it was Todd Hargrove's first book, Better Movement, that actually helped me to think along those lines too. Like, I just need to play and just get my body moving and doing these things again. So I stopped, and I was a heavy lifter when I was a firefighter. I was a runner, I ran long distances, I was a heavy lifter, I was all these things. But there was one time in Colorado, I was taking pictures, and I was standing on these two rocks in the Fraser River, which is a snowmelt river. It's always cold. And it was just like during spring melt. So the water was really cold, and I did not want to fall into it, but I wanted to get a really low angle for it so I could frame the picture just right, because I'm just using my phone. I don't have Zoom or anything like that. And I was squatting on these two rocks over this freezing cold river to take a picture. And I looked down and I went, I'm squatting! Like, and I haven't even been practicing it or doing it at the gym or anything. And I'm just doing it. And it was such a revelatory moment. Like, oh my God, my body can still do all of these things. Right. And it's amazing how adaptable and resilient we are. And especially maybe if we're not overthinking it. Right. Right.
And
And so
that's
the over
how it is. I mean, you weren't going to get that picture without squatting over those two blocks.
And
that was a very functional thing your brain had to put together quickly for you to get that shot.
Yeah, and I absolutely did not want to fall into that river because
No.
it was going to be cold and
Right.
it would also mess up my phone.
Right. Yes. Not good on both accounts. So we should say that Todd Hargrove is a Feldenkrais practitioner, and has a beautiful book on better movement. And it's really just about a sensory motor novel movement experiences that when we are very protective and hypervigilant, novel movement experiences help us to calm the body down and connect the brain and sensation again with movement. So it's a beautiful way to get started, isn't it?
It is. And he's got a new book out that's wonderful on play. It's so good, and I highly recommend it. But yeah, that way of thinking of it being more playful and novel and not so structured, and not that that's bad, especially if you have specific goals that require kind of structured, periodized planning.
Right.
But that wasn't what my goals were.
No,
Still not what I just want to engage with life and have fun. But now, I mean, I snowboard, I run again, I hike, I do all the things that I want to do, and I don't feel like I have to do a structured plan or go to the gym and work out to do those things.
So the other piece that I found very interesting in your story, and I was privileged enough to observe that, was at the conference maybe 2 years ago when Peter O'Sullivan taught the pre-conference course, and you were one of the patients that he worked with on that course.
Yeah.
And I think that was a pivotal point as well, as I understand it, in the change that you were able to make. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so my two huge pivotal moments in my healing process and my recovery were Lorimer Mosley telling me to love and be loved, and Peter O'Sullivan asking me to tell him my story. So during that, and it's funny because I didn't think I was going to be a good patient demo for Peter O'Sullivan. I'm like, I've been studying pain science for years. Like, what can I possibly learn? Yeah. But I had been having pain in my other hip for about 7 months leading up to the pain summit. And I had stopped running. I had stopped doing some of the things that I had been doing because my right hip was feeling better. And my life was becoming a little bit smaller again, but I didn't really realize it. And it was really interesting for me, and I was in it, was Peter started that demo by asking me to tell him my story. And I wasn't expecting that because I didn't know anything about him at the time. And I said, where do you want me to start? And he said, wherever you want. And I was like, oh. And I didn't talk about my left hip pain at all. I went all the way back to January of 2010 when I stepped off that fire engine and felt the twinge in my right hip. And just through being able to share my story and tell my story, I was able to connect so many of my own dots. I realized how fearful I was that the same thing was happening on my left side, that I was going to go down the same path with the pain in my left hip that I went down with my right hip, that I had built up this life again, that I had been writing my blog, I had started the nonprofit, I was snowboarding and doing all these things that I enjoyed doing. I was volunteering with the National Sports Center for the Disabled as an adaptive snowboard coach. Like all of these things that I loved, I was so afraid I was going to lose it all again. So afraid that I was going to go back to that small, isolated, painful world, be enshrouded by that malignantness. But I didn't realize that until I had that opportunity to give it a voice. And I realized how many of those movement habits and postures from my earlier pain days I had fallen back on, so he had me do some movement experiments, which were incredibly helpful and eye-opening for me to realize how I was constantly putting myself in extension. I was going back to that, I have to roll my hips forward, bring my shoulders back. And whether I was sitting or standing or laying on the ground, I was in that same posture in all of those different ways. And here I'm thinking I'm being all variable in my movement. I've written so many posts about it. But once that pain crept back up, I just fell back on all those postural and movement habits. So recognizing that, and then but one thing I learned too, I sucked at flexion because it's against everything I've ever learned in any capacity. At being a heavy lifter when I was a firefighter, working out a lot, you don't do any of those things in flexion. So when he was having me like squat and do all these movement experiments in flexion, sit in flexion, stand in flexion, squat in flexion, do lunges in flexion, it wasn't as physically challenging as it was cognitively challenging. Like I just couldn't even get my body to do it because I had to overcome these like learned behaviors that I had engaged in for so long. But it was super interesting just to be able to tell that story, to go through those movement experiments, to know that there probably wasn't a whole lot structurally going on with my hip that was causing me problems. And then also coming to the realization myself that even if it was FAI, I wouldn't have surgery again. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the same thing is happening there. And when I got back from San Diego, I went for a run and realized, and we had walked our dog along the Fraser River Trail by where we live. Gone back to the house, I dropped the boys off, and I was going right back to the same trail to run. As I was walking back to the trail, my pain started to go up. So I realized, I'm like, that has nothing to do with the structure of my hip. Absolutely nothing to do with the structure of my hip. So I would just like coach myself through relaxing and flexing. And I tried to run like a turtle. Like I was trying to make myself look like a turtle and run that way. And then I would try to get all floppy and do all these things that, are so against the grain when you're running. It's not good form whatsoever. Right. So I would run, and my pain didn't go away. I still had the pain, but it didn't go up and it didn't become worse. And then I just kept doing it. And now I'm back to running again. And that's all stuck since it was 2017. Right. Yeah. All of those things stuck since that 2-hour demo. Because I learned so much through that ability to tell my story. And then together, we walk through some of these behavioral experiments and kind of talk about it. And then just through all of that, you co-create a different narrative. You know, together you come up with a different narrative and a path forward. What was funny about that, so many clinicians focused on the exercises that he gave me. I never did them.
No, no, it was just, it was really just, he was so expert in giving you permission to move in different ways and to challenge your own beliefs. And I love what you just said around that co-creation piece, because I think that's where we'll stop for this particular session. But because this is so interesting, I think one of the things we would love to do, Joletta, is have you back again. And we're going to do a second part to this component of the project, where we look at the co-creation of the story that the patient tells, rather than replacing the story with what we think it needs to be replaced with from a clinical perspective, actually partnering with our patients and creating a new story together that makes sense biologically, but also makes sense to them in their historical sort of concepts. How does that sound? I think that would be fantastic.
I think it would be fantastic too. I look forward to it.
Awesome. That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us over the past 45 minutes. Joletta, thank you for sharing your story once again. I've heard it numerous times at this point, and every time I listen to you tell it, I hear a different nuance and a different component to it. What I think is really remarkable is your ability to transcend your story and bring that lived experience to other people to help them also make changes within their life. So thank you so much for the work that you do and the passion that you have in this work.
Thank you. That means a lot to me.
All right. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. Good.
Thank you, everybody. See you on the next project.